I was not born to kneel, yet there I was, on my knees before a man who would change the entire course of my existence with a single golden coin. They say that fate announces itself with thunder and lightning, but mine arrived in silence, rolling across a marble floor on a gray November morning, catching the pale light from the windows of Ashworth Hall like a small, treacherous sun. My name is Eleanor Ashford, and before I became a maid, I was the daughter of Viscount Ashford of Hertfordshire. I was raised on piano sonatas and French poetry, on the promise that I would one day marry well and continue the legacy of a family whose name had graced the peerage for 6 generations. My mother died giving birth to me, and so my father became everything. He was my teacher, my protector, my entire world. He taught me to read Latin before I turned 7. He told me that a woman's mind was her greatest weapon, and that I should sharpen mine until it gleamed. I believed him. I believed every word he ever spoke to me, until the night he died, and I discovered that the man I had loved and trusted had been lying to me my entire life. The debts came first, then the creditors, then the truth, piece by piece, like shards of a broken mirror reflecting a reality I had never seen. My father had not been the honorable man I believed him to be. He had gambled away our fortune in secret gaming halls across London. He had borrowed from men whose names were spoken only in whispers. He had sold everything of value we owned, including my mother's jewelry, including the paintings that had hung in our gallery for generations, including, I would later learn, my own future. There was no dowry. There had not been one for years. The suitors who had once called upon me vanished like morning mist the moment word spread of our ruin. And when the last of the creditors came to claim what remained of our estate, I was left with nothing but the clothes on my back and a name that had become synonymous with shame. I was 19 years old. I had no relatives willing to acknowledge me, no friends brave enough to defy the whispers of society, no skills that could earn me an honest living in a world that had no place for fallen women of gentle birth. I had only my pride, and even that was a luxury I could no longer afford. It was Mrs. Blackwood, the housekeeper of a modest household in Chelsea, who first suggested I seek a position in service. She had known my mother years ago, and she took pity on me when I appeared at her door, half-starved and desperate. She told me that a great house in the countryside was seeking new maids, that the pay was generous, and that the Duke who owned the estate was known to be fair, if cold. She warned me that he was not a kind man. She warned me that his household was run with military precision, and that any girl who could not keep pace would be dismissed without a second thought. But she also told me that he valued honesty above all else, and that if I could prove myself trustworthy, I might find a measure of security within his walls. I did not tell her who I truly was. I gave her a false surname, a false history, a false version of myself that bore no resemblance to the girl I had once been. I became Eleanor Smith, orphan daughter of a country parson, seeking honest work to support herself. It was the first lie I had ever told, and it tasted like ash on my tongue, but I had no choice. The truth would have condemned me to a life of even greater misery, for no respectable household would hire the disgraced daughter of a ruined viscount. I had to become someone else. I had to erase everything I had been and start again, as if my entire life before that moment had been nothing more than a dream. The journey to Ashworth Hall took 3 days by coach. I traveled with 5 other girls, all of us hired sight unseen, all of us clutching our meager belongings and our desperate hopes. They were kind to me, those girls. Mary, who was barely 16 and had never been more than 5 miles from her village. Agnes, who had worked in a factory until her lungs gave out, and she was told she would die if she did not find cleaner air. Prudence, who spoke little but watched everything with eyes that had seen too much. Dorothea, who laughed at everything and nothing, as if the world were a joke only she understood. And Clara, the oldest among us, who had been in service for 20 years and knew every trick, every shortcut, every way to survive in a world that valued women only for their usefulness. They did not know that I had once worn silk instead of cotton. They did not know that I had once danced at balls instead of scrubbing floors, and I intended to keep it that way. I could not afford to be discovered. I could not afford to be pitied. I could not afford to be anything other than what I claimed to be, a simple girl seeking a simple life, asking nothing more than a roof over her head and food in her belly. Ashworth Hall revealed itself to us on the evening of the third day, rising from the mist like a great stone beast crouched upon the hillside. It was magnificent and terrible, a monument to wealth and power that made my breath catch in my throat. I had seen grand houses before. I had been a guest in some of them, in the life I had left behind. But I had never seen anything like Ashworth Hall. It was not merely large, it was vast, sprawling across the landscape as if it had grown there organically, its towers and turrets reaching toward a sky the color of bruised plums. The windows glowed with candlelight, hundreds of them, flickering like distant stars. And I remember thinking that it would take an army of servants to keep all those candles burning. We were met at the servants' entrance by Mrs. Hartley, the housekeeper, a woman whose face seemed carved from the same gray stone as the house itself. She was tall and thin, with steel-colored hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch the skin of her forehead, and eyes that missed nothing. She inspected each of us in turn, her gaze lingering on our hands, our posture, our shoes. When she reached me, she paused. I felt her eyes trace the line of my jaw, the set of my shoulders, the way I held my head. I knew what she saw. I knew that no matter how I tried to disguise it, there was something in my bearing that did not belong to a parson's daughter. But she said nothing. She merely nodded, made a note in the ledger she carried, and moved on to the next girl. We were given our uniforms that night, plain black dresses with white aprons and caps, identical to one another, designed to render us invisible. We were shown to our quarters, a long, narrow room on the uppermost floor of the servants' wing, with 6 small beds arranged in a row beneath the eaves. The mattresses were thin, the blankets worn, but they were clean, and after 3 days of traveling, they felt like heaven. I lay awake that first night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around me, and I promised myself that I would survive this. I would work harder than anyone else. I would keep my head down and my mouth shut. I would earn my place here, and I would never, ever give anyone reason to suspect that I was anything other than what I claimed to be. The first test came sooner than I expected. We were summoned to the great hall on our first morning, all 6 of us, to receive our instructions from Mrs. Hartley. The hall was enormous, larger than the entire ground floor of the house I had grown up in, with vaulted ceilings that disappeared into shadow and walls lined with portraits of ancestors who seemed to watch our every move with disapproving eyes. A fire burned in the massive hearth at the far end, but its warmth did not reach us where we stood, shivering in our thin uniforms, waiting to learn our fate. And then he appeared. I had heard stories about the Duke of Ashworth. Everyone had. He was one of the wealthiest men in England, master of estates that stretched across 3 counties, heir to a title that dated back to the time of Henry VIII. But he was also one of the most mysterious. He rarely appeared in society. He never entertained. He had married young to a woman of exceptional beauty and impeccable breeding, and she had died 3 years later under circumstances that no one would speak of openly. Some said she had taken her own life. Others whispered of darker things, of secrets and lies, of a marriage that had been a prison rather than a partnership. But no one knew the truth because the Duke never spoke of her, and no one dared to ask. I expected a monster. I expected a man twisted by grief and bitterness, with cruelty written in every line of his face. What I saw instead was something far more dangerous. He was beautiful. I know that is not the word one typically uses to describe a man, but there is no other that fits. He was tall, taller than any man I had ever seen, with broad shoulders and a lean, athletic build that spoke of hours spent on horseback. His hair was dark, almost black, swept back from a face that could have been sculpted by a Renaissance master. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, a mouth that seemed made for either kissing or cruelty. But it was his eyes that undid me. They were gray, the color of winter storms, the color of steel, the color of the sky just before it weeps. And they were empty. Not cold, not cruel, just empty. As if everything that had once lived behind them had been extinguished long ago, leaving nothing but ash. He walked into the great hall without acknowledging any of us, his boots striking the marble floor with a rhythm as precise as a military drum. He moved like a man who owned the world and found it disappointing. He stopped near the fireplace, his back to the flames, and surveyed us with an expression of utter indifference. I felt the other girls shrink beside me, their fear palpable, their breathing shallow. But I could not look away. Something in me, some foolish, reckless part that had not yet learned to be afraid, refused to bow before this man who seemed to believe he was above us all. Mrs. Hartley began to speak, explaining our duties, our schedules, the rules we were expected to follow. I tried to listen, but my attention kept drifting back to the Duke, who had not moved, had not spoken, had done nothing but stand there and watch us with those terrible, beautiful eyes. And then, just as Mrs. Hartley was explaining the importance of punctuality, something happened. A coin fell from the Duke's pocket. It hit the marble floor with a sound like a bell, clear and bright in the silence of the hall, and then it rolled. We all watched it, mesmerized, as it traced a lazy arc across the polished stone, catching the firelight, gleaming like a tiny sun. It came to rest near the center of the room, equidistant from all of us. A perfect golden circle against the white marble. 1,000-pound coin. A fortune. More money than any of us would earn in a lifetime of service. No one moved. I saw Mary glance at it, then quickly look away, her face flushing with shame. Agnes pressed her hands against her apron, as if she were afraid they might reach for it of their own accord. Prudence stared straight ahead, her expression carefully blank. Dorothea let out a nervous giggle that died in her throat when Mrs. Hartley shot her a warning look. Clara, the oldest and wisest among us, kept her eyes fixed on the floor, refusing to acknowledge that the coin existed at all. I understood their fear. We all knew the stories. Servants who were caught stealing were not merely dismissed. They were prosecuted, imprisoned, sometimes transported to the colonies. A single accusation could destroy a life. And here was a test, obvious and cruel, designed to expose the thieves among us. The smart thing to do was what the others were doing. Pretend the coin did not exist. Let someone else take the risk. Survive. But I could not. I do not know what possessed me in that moment. Perhaps it was the memory of my father, who had taught me that honesty was the foundation of all virtue, even as he built his own life on a foundation of lies. Perhaps it was the sight of the Duke, standing there in his cold perfection, believing he had the right to test us like animals. Perhaps it was simply that I was tired of being afraid, tired of hiding, tired of pretending to be something I was not. I stepped forward. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the silence of the hall, impossibly loud, impossibly slow. I felt every eye upon me. I felt the Duke's gaze like a physical weight pressing against my skin. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. But I did not stop. I walked to where the coin lay gleaming on the marble, and I bent down and I picked it up. It was warm in my hand, heavy, real. I straightened and I walked toward the Duke. I could feel the other girls staring at me, their horror and disbelief radiating from them like heat from a flame. I could feel Mrs. Hartley's sharp intake of breath, her certainty that she was about to witness my destruction. But I did not care. I had made my choice, and I would see it through. I stopped before the Duke. He was even more imposing up close, his height forcing me to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. I saw something flicker in those gray depths, something that might have been surprise or curiosity, or simply the cold calculation of a man assessing a new piece on his chessboard. But his face remained expressionless, carved from the same stone as the statues that lined the gallery above us. I held out my hand, the coin resting on my open palm. "Your Grace," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I believe you dropped this." For a long moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched between us, taut as a bowstring, and I began to wonder if I had made a terrible mistake. Then, slowly, the Duke reached out and took the coin from my hand. His fingers brushed against my palm, and I felt a shock of warmth that seemed entirely at odds with the coldness of his gaze. He looked at the coin. He looked at me. And then, for the first time since he had entered the hall, he spoke. "What is your name?" His voice was deep and quiet, with a roughness to it that suggested he did not use it often. It was not a kind voice, but it was not cruel either. It was simply a voice that expected to be obeyed. "Eleanor, Your Grace," I said. "Eleanor Smith." He studied me for a moment longer, his eyes tracing my face the way Mrs. Hartley's had traced my hands and posture the night before. I saw the same flicker of recognition, the same question forming behind his eyes. But unlike Mrs. Hartley, he asked it. "You are not what you appear to be," he said. It was not a question. I felt my blood turn to ice. I felt the careful fiction I had constructed begin to crumble around me. But I held his gaze, and I did not flinch. "I am what I need to be, Your Grace," I said. Something changed in his expression then. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. A softening, perhaps. Or a deepening of that curiosity I had glimpsed before. He looked at the coin in his hand, then back at me, and for a moment I thought he might say something more. But he did not. He simply nodded once and turned away. "You may return to your place," he said over his shoulder. "Mrs. Hartley will give you your assignments." And just like that, it was over. The Duke walked out of the hall without another word, without another glance, leaving behind nothing but the echo of his footsteps and the strange, unsettling warmth that lingered on my palm where his fingers had touched mine. I learned later from Clara that the coin was a test. The Duke had used it for years, with every new group of servants who entered his household. He wanted to know who among them was honest enough to return it, brave enough to approach him, stupid enough to risk everything for a principle. In all the years he had conducted this test, no one had ever returned the coin. Some had stolen it. Most had ignored it, too afraid of the consequences to act. But no one had ever done what I had done. No one had ever looked him in the eye and given it back as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "He is interested in you now," Clara warned me that night, as we lay in our narrow beds beneath the eaves. "That is not a good thing. The Duke does not take interest in people. He uses them, and when he is finished, he discards them. You should have left the coin where it was. You should have been invisible, like the rest of us." But I could not be invisible. I had tried. God knows I had tried. But there was something in me that refused to disappear, something that burned too brightly to be extinguished, no matter how hard I tried to smother it. And now the Duke had seen it. Now he knew that I was not what I claimed to be, and I could only pray that his curiosity would fade before he discovered the truth. It did not fade. In the days that followed, I felt his eyes upon me constantly. I would be polishing the silver in the butler's pantry, and I would look up to find him standing in the doorway, watching me with that unreadable expression. I would be carrying linens down the corridor, and I would turn a corner to find him there, as if he had been waiting for me. He never spoke to me. He never acknowledged me in any way. But he was always there, a shadow at the edge of my vision, a presence I could not escape. The other servants noticed. Of course they did. In a household like Ashworth Hall, nothing went unobserved. Whispers followed me wherever I went. I heard them in the kitchen, in the servants' hall, in the dormitory at night when the other girls thought I was asleep. They said the Duke had taken a fancy to me. They said I was angling to become his mistress. They said I was a fool who did not know the danger she was courting, or a schemer who knew exactly what she was doing. None of them bothered to ask me the truth. None of them would have believed it if I had told them. The truth was that I did not understand the Duke's interest any more than they did. I had done nothing to encourage it. I had been nothing but a servant, performing my duties with the same diligence as everyone else, keeping my head down and my mouth shut, just as I had promised myself I would. But something had changed on that first morning, when I had picked up his coin and returned it to him. Something had shifted between us. Some invisible thread had been spun that now connected us in ways I could not comprehend. And no matter how hard I tried to sever it, no matter how much I avoided his gaze and hurried past his presence, that thread remained. It was Mrs. Hartley who finally summoned me to explain. She called me to her sitting room on a Wednesday afternoon, a small, austere space, furnished with a single desk, 2 chairs, and a portrait of the late Duchess that hung above the fireplace like a silent accusation. I had seen that portrait before, in the main gallery, but I had never stopped to study it closely. Now, standing before Mrs. Hartley's desk while she examined a letter with deliberate slowness, I found my eyes drawn to it against my will. The Duchess had been beautiful, extraordinarily so. She had pale blonde hair arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken hours to achieve, and a face as delicate and perfect as a porcelain doll's. But there was something wrong with her eyes. They were blue, large and luminous, but they were empty in a way that reminded me of the Duke's. Not cold, not cruel, just empty, as if the woman who had posed for this portrait had already departed her body and left nothing but a shell behind. I wondered, not for the first time, what had really happened to her. I wondered if the rumors were true. I wondered if she had been unhappy, if her marriage had been a prison, if she had found death preferable to another day in this vast, cold house with a husband who seemed incapable of feeling anything at all. "The Duke has requested that you be assigned to the library," Mrs. Hartley said, interrupting my thoughts. Her voice was flat, carefully neutral, but I could hear the disapproval beneath it. "You will report there each morning at 9 o'clock to dust the shelves, tend the fire, and perform whatever other tasks His Grace requires." I felt my heart stumble. The library? That was the Duke's private domain, the one room in the house where servants rarely ventured. It was said that he spent most of his time there, surrounded by his books and his papers and his silence. To be assigned there was to be placed directly in his path, day after day, with no escape and no protection. "Mrs. Hartley," I began, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand. "I do not know what you did to attract His Grace's attention," she said, "and I do not wish to know. But I will tell you this, girl. The Duke is not a man to be trifled with. He has no patience for deception, no tolerance for weakness, and no mercy for those who disappoint him. Whatever game you think you are playing, I advise you to abandon it now, before it is too late." "I am not playing any game," I said, and I meant it. "I do not understand why the Duke has taken an interest in me. I have done nothing to encourage it." Mrs. Hartley looked at me for a long moment, her gray eyes searching my face for evidence of a lie. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded slowly and returned her attention to the letter on her desk. "Perhaps you are telling the truth," she said. "Perhaps you are simply unfortunate. Either way, you will report to the library tomorrow morning. And you will conduct yourself with the utmost propriety at all times. Is that understood?" "Yes, Mrs. Hartley," I said. She dismissed me with a wave, and I left her sitting room with my mind spinning and my heart heavy with dread. I did not want to be near the Duke. I did not want to feel his eyes upon me, watching, calculating, trying to solve the puzzle I represented. I did not want to think about the warmth of his fingers against my palm, or the way his voice had softened when he spoke my name, or the strange pull I felt toward him despite every instinct telling me to run. But I had no choice. I was a servant, and he was the master. My fate was in his hands, and there was nothing I could do but pray that he would tire of me before he discovered the truth. The library at Ashworth Hall was unlike anything I had ever seen. It occupied the entire east wing of the house, a vast cathedral of books that rose 3 stories high and seemed to stretch into infinity. The shelves were carved from dark mahogany, polished to a gleam that reflected the light from the tall windows that lined the outer wall. Rolling ladders on brass rails provided access to the upper levels, and scattered throughout the space were leather armchairs, reading desks, and small tables piled high with volumes that the Duke was apparently in the process of studying. I arrived at 9 o'clock, as instructed, carrying my cleaning supplies and my determination to remain professional and invisible. The Duke was not there. I felt a moment of relief, quickly followed by a surge of anxiety. Where was he? Was he watching me from some hidden alcove? Would he appear suddenly, as he always seemed to do, catching me off guard and unprepared? I set about my work, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I dusted the lower shelves first, working methodically from one end of the room to the other. The books were magnificent, many of them centuries old, bound in leather and stamped with gold. I recognized some of the titles from my father's library, back in the life I had left behind. Milton, Shakespeare, Plutarch, Voltaire. My fingers itched to pull them from their shelves and lose myself in their pages, but I knew better than to indulge that impulse. I was here to clean, not to read. I was here to be useful, not to be seen. An hour passed. Then two. I finished the lower shelves and moved to the upper level, climbing one of the rolling ladders with my duster and cloth. From this height, I could see the entire library spread out below me like a landscape, beautiful and overwhelming. I could see the sunlight streaming through the windows, painting golden rectangles on the oriental carpet. I could see the dust motes dancing in the air, tiny galaxies of light and shadow. I could see the door at the far end of the room, which was closed when I arrived and remained closed now. I was reaching for a particularly high shelf, stretching my arm as far as it would go, when I heard the door open. I froze. My heart, which had finally begun to slow, immediately resumed its frantic rhythm. I did not look down. I did not move. I simply stood there on my ladder, my duster raised above my head, and waited. His footsteps crossed the library floor, slow and measured. I heard the creak of leather as he settled into one of the armchairs. I heard the rustle of paper as he opened a book or a letter. And then there was silence, absolute, suffocating silence. I forced myself to move. I forced myself to continue my work, dusting the shelves with hands that trembled despite my best efforts to control them. I told myself that he was simply reading, that he had no interest in me, that I was being foolish and paranoid. But I could feel his gaze upon me, as tangible as a touch, following my every movement. "You do not need to be afraid," he said. His voice startled me so badly that I nearly lost my grip on the ladder. I grabbed the rail, steadying myself, and looked down. He was sitting in an armchair near the window, a book open on his lap, watching me with those gray, unreadable eyes. "I am not afraid, Your Grace," I said, though we both knew it was a lie. The corner of his mouth twitched. It was not quite a smile, but it was close, the first sign of expression I had seen on his face since the morning of the coin. "You lie," he said, with grace. "That is a rare skill for a servant." I did not know how to respond to that, so I said nothing. I simply stood there on my ladder, looking down at him, waiting for him to reveal his purpose. Because he had one. I was certain of it. Men like the Duke of Ashworth did not assign servants to their private libraries for the pleasure of their company. He wanted something from me. I just did not know what. "Come down," he said. It was not a request. I descended the ladder carefully, acutely aware of his eyes upon me, acutely aware of the way my uniform clung to my body, acutely aware of every sound and shadow in that vast, silent room. When I reached the floor, I smoothed my apron and folded my hands before me, the picture of servile propriety. But I did not lower my gaze. I had learned, in the weeks since my arrival, that the Duke respected honesty above all else. And meeting his eyes honestly was the only weapon I had. He studied me for a long moment. Then he set aside his book and gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit," he said. "Your Grace, it would not be proper for me to—" "I do not care about propriety," he interrupted. "Sit." I hesitated. Then, because I had no choice, I sat. The chair was soft and deep, designed for comfort, and I felt absurdly out of place in it. My uniform was stained with dust. My hands were rough from weeks of scrubbing and polishing. I did not belong in this chair, in this library, in the presence of this man who watched me as if I were a cipher he intended to solve. "Tell me about yourself, Eleanor Smith," he said. And I felt my blood turn cold. "There is nothing to tell, Your Grace. I am a parson's daughter, orphaned and alone, seeking honest work to support myself. He tilted his head, a gesture that reminded me, absurdly, of a hawk considering its prey. A parson's daughter, he repeated, who holds herself like a lady of breeding, who speaks with the accent of the aristocracy, who knows how to handle fine things with the care of someone who has owned them. I felt the walls closing in around me. I felt my carefully constructed fiction begin to crack and crumble. But I held his gaze, and I did not flinch. My father believed in education, Your Grace. He raised me above my station. Perhaps he should not have. Perhaps, the Duke agreed. Or perhaps you are lying to me, Eleanor Smith. Perhaps you are not who you claim to be. I should have denied it. I should have laughed and protested and played the innocent. But something in his eyes stopped me. Something in the way he looked at me. Not with accusation, but with something that almost resembled understanding. As if he knew what it was to wear a mask. As if he knew what it was to pretend to be something you were not. Does it matter, Your Grace? I heard myself say. I am a servant in your household. I perform my duties faithfully and honestly. What I was before is of no consequence. It matters to me, he said quietly. Why? He did not answer immediately. He turned away, looking out the window at the gray November sky, and for a moment I saw something in his profile that I had not seen before. Pain. Deep, old pain, the kind that never fully heals, the kind that shapes you, defines you, becomes so much a part of you that you cannot remember who you were before it. Because I am tired, he said finally. I am tired of lies. I am tired of people who tell me what they think I want to hear. I am tired of being surrounded by masks and performances and careful calculations. And you, Eleanor Smith, are the first person in a very long time who has looked me in the eye and told me the truth, even when it would have been safer to lie. I returned your coin, I said. That is all? Yes, you returned my coin. And in doing so, you showed me something I had almost forgotten existed. What is that, Your Grace? Integrity, he said. He turned back to me, and there was something different in his eyes now. Something warmer, though no less intense. I dropped that coin on purpose. I have dropped it dozens of times, with dozens of servants, and not one of them has ever returned it. Some stole it. Most pretended not to see it. They were all afraid of me, and their fear made them dishonest. But you were not afraid. Or if you were, you did not let your fear control you. You did what was right, simply because it was right. And that, Eleanor Smith, is rarer than you know. I did not know what to say. I sat in my borrowed chair, in my dusty uniform, in the library of a man who was supposed to be my master, and I felt something shift between us. A wall, perhaps, beginning to crumble. A door, beginning to open. I did not understand it. I was not sure I wanted to understand it, but I could not deny that it was happening. I am not a good man, Eleanor, the Duke said, and the use of my name without the surname felt like an intimacy, a crossing of some invisible line. I have done things I am not proud of. I have hurt people who trusted me. I have built walls around myself so high and so thick that I sometimes wonder if there is anything left behind them. But when you looked at me that morning and returned my coin, I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt hope, and that is why I asked for you to be assigned to this library. Not to use you, not to exploit you, but because I wanted to understand. I wanted to know who you really are. The silence stretched between us, heavy with possibility. I knew I should speak. I knew I should say something. Anything, to break the tension that crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. But I could not find the words. I could only sit there, looking into his gray eyes, and feel the truth rising in my throat like a tide. I am not who I claim to be, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I was born Eleanor Ashford, daughter of Viscount Ashford of Hertfordshire. My father died in debt and disgrace, and I lost everything. My name, my position, my future. I came here because I had nowhere else to go, and I lied because the truth would have destroyed any chance I had of survival. I expected him to be angry. I expected him to call for Mrs. Hartley, to have me dismissed, to cast me out into the cold for my deception. But he did not move. He simply sat there, watching me, and the expression on his face was not anger, but something else entirely. Something that looked almost like relief. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank you for telling me. Are you going to dismiss me?" "No." "Are you going to expose me?" "No." "Then what are you going to do?" He was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he rose from his chair and crossed the distance between us. He stopped before me, close enough that I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble on his jaw, the steady rise and fall of his chest. He extended his hand, palm up, in a gesture that was both formal and strangely intimate. "I am going to ask you to trust me," he said, "and I am going to promise you that your secret is safe with me, as long as you wish it to be." I looked at his hand. I looked at his face. I thought of all the reasons I should refuse, all the dangers of accepting, all the ways this could end in disaster. And then, because I had always been more brave than wise, I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm and strong, and I felt that strange connection between us strengthen and deepen. I did not know what would happen next. I did not know what he wanted from me, or what I wanted from him. I knew only that something had changed, irrevocably and forever, and that there was no going back. "I trust you," I said, and I meant it. The days that followed were unlike anything I had experienced before. My duties in the library continued, but they were transformed. Where once I had worked in silence and solitude, now I worked in the Duke's presence, and his presence changed everything. He would sit in his chair by the window, reading or writing, while I dusted and tidied around him. Sometimes he would ask me questions about my childhood, my father, the life I had lost. Sometimes he would tell me things, fragments of his own history, pieces of the puzzle that was his past. And sometimes we would simply exist in silence together, two broken people sharing a space, finding comfort in each other's company, without the need for words. I learned, in those quiet hours, that the Duke was not the cold and heartless man the world believed him to be. He was wounded. He was guarded. He had built his walls so high that he had forgotten how to lower them. But beneath those walls, beneath the ice and the silence, there was a man who felt deeply and suffered greatly, a man who had loved once and lost and never recovered from the loss. He told me about his wife on a rainy afternoon, a week after I had confessed my true identity. We were sitting by the fire in the library, watching the rain streak down the windows, and he began to speak as if the words had been building inside him for years and could no longer be contained. "Her name was Charlotte," he said. "She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I fell in love with her the moment I saw her, at a ball in London, when I was 22, and foolish enough to believe that love was enough. We married 3 months later, against the wishes of both our families, and for a while I thought we would be happy. I thought our love was strong enough to overcome anything." He paused, staring into the fire, and I saw the pain flicker across his face like shadows. "I was wrong," he continued. "Charlotte was not the woman I thought she was. She was not cruel, but she was not honest. She had married me for my title and my wealth, not for love. And when she realized that I expected more from her than she was willing to give, she retreated into herself. She became cold and distant. She spent her days in her chambers, refusing to see me, refusing to speak to me, refusing to be anything other than a ghost in my own home. I tried everything I could think of to reach her, but nothing worked. And then, 3 years after our wedding, she took her own life. I listened in silence, my heart aching for him. I wanted to reach out, to touch him, to offer some comfort. But I did not know how. I did not know what words could possibly ease a pain so deep and so old. "It was my fault," the Duke said, his voice rough with emotion. "I should have seen how unhappy she was. I should have understood that she was suffering. But I was too proud, too focused on my own hurt, too convinced that if I just tried harder, I could make her love me. I failed her, and I have carried that failure with me every day since. It was not your fault, I said softly. You loved her. You tried. That is more than many men would have done. He looked at me then, and there was something in his eyes that I had never seen before. Vulnerability, gratitude, a desperate, aching hope that he was afraid to let himself feel. You are the first person who has ever said that to me, he said. Everyone else blamed me. My family, her family, society. They all believed that I had driven her to her death, that I was cold and cruel and incapable of love. And after a while, I began to believe it too. I began to think that perhaps they were right. Perhaps I was the monster they believed me to be. You are not a monster, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. You are a man who loved and lost, and who never learned how to forgive himself. But you are not cold, and you are not cruel. I have seen the way you treat your servants, the fairness and decency with which you run this household. I have seen the way you look at me, not as a possession to be used, but as a person to be understood. That is not the behavior of a monster. That is the behavior of a good man who has been hurt and who is afraid to let himself be hurt again. The Duke was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and took my hand. Eleanor, he said, and my name on his lips was like a prayer, I do not know what you have done to me. I have spent years building walls around my heart, convincing myself that I did not need anyone, that I was better off alone. And then you walked into my hall and returned my coin and looked at me as if I were not a duke or a widower or a failure, but simply a man. And I have not been able to stop thinking about you since. My heart was racing. My breath was coming in short, shallow gasps. I knew I should pull my hand away. I knew I should remind him of the impossibility of this, the social chasm that yawned between us, the scandal that would engulf us both if anyone suspected the truth. But I could not move. I could only sit there, my hand in his, and feel the warmth of his skin against mine, and wonder how I had ever believed that I could be invisible to this man. Your Grace, I began, but he shook his head. My name is James, he said, and when we are alone, I would like you to use it. James. The word felt strange on my tongue, foreign and familiar all at once. I had never called a man by his Christian name before, except for my father. It felt intimate. It felt dangerous. It felt like a door opening onto a path I was not sure I had the courage to walk. James, I said, and I saw something flicker in his eyes, something warm and bright and utterly unexpected. What is happening between us? I do not know, he admitted. I only know that when I am with you, I feel things I had believed myself incapable of feeling, and I know that I do not want it to stop. He lifted my hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to my knuckles, soft and reverent, and I felt a shiver run through my entire body. It was not fear. It was something else entirely. Something I had never felt before, not in my life of balls and suitors and proper courtship. Something that burned and ached and demanded to be acknowledged. We cannot, I whispered. The scandal alone would destroy us both. I know, he said, and I do not care. He released my hand and rose from his chair, and for a moment I thought he was going to leave, was going to walk away and pretend that this moment had never happened. But instead he moved closer, kneeling before me so that our faces were level, so that I could see every line and shadow, every hope and fear, every crack in the armor he had worn for so long. Eleanor, he said, I am not asking you for anything. I am not demanding anything. I know that what I feel is impossible, that the world would never allow it, that there are 1,000 reasons why we should walk away from this and never speak of it again. But I cannot lie to you. I have lied to so many people, for so many years, and I am tired of it. You asked me to be honest with you, and so I will be. I love you. I do not know when it happened or how, but I love you. And whatever comes next, whatever decisions you make, I wanted you to know that. I stared at him, speechless. I had dreamed of hearing those words in the life I had left behind. I had imagined a suitor, handsome and wealthy, kneeling before me and declaring his love. But I had never imagined this. I had never imagined that the man saying those words would be a duke, a widower, a man whose reputation was shrouded in scandal and mystery. I had never imagined that I would be wearing a servant's uniform with dust on my hands and calluses on my palms when the moment came. And I had never imagined that I would feel what I felt in that moment. A rush of emotion so overwhelming that it stole my breath and blurred my vision with tears. A certainty, deep and unshakable, that whatever happened next, I would never be the same. "I love you too," I said, and the words came out in a rush, as if they had been waiting for years to be spoken. I do not know how it happened. I do not know what it means. But I love you, James, and I am terrified. He reached up and cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had begun to fall. "Then we will be terrified together," he said, "and we will face whatever comes, together." And then he kissed me. It was not my first kiss. I had been kissed before, by eager suitors at country dances, by a young man I had once believed I might marry before my father's death had destroyed all my prospects. But this kiss was different. This kiss was everything. It was soft and fierce and desperate and tender all at once. It was a promise and a question and an answer. It was the beginning of something I did not fully understand, but knew in my heart I could not live without. When we finally pulled apart, breathless and trembling, the Duke rested his forehead against mine and closed his eyes. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "remember this moment. Remember that I loved you truly and that you loved me. Whatever the world tries to do to us, they cannot take that away. I will remember, I promised. I will always remember." But even as I spoke the words, I knew that our love was not the only force at work in Ashworth Hall. There were others who had their own plans, their own schemes, their own reasons for wanting to control the Duke and his future. And soon those forces would converge, threatening to destroy everything we had built in the quiet sanctuary of the library. Lady Marguerite arrived on a December afternoon, when the first snow was falling and the world outside had turned to white. She was the Duke's elder sister, a woman of formidable presence and impeccable breeding, who had married an earl at 18 and been widowed at 30. She now occupied herself with managing the affairs of everyone around her, convinced that she alone knew what was best for the family name. I saw her from the window of the servants' hall, descending from her carriage in a flurry of fur and feathers, her voice ringing out across the courtyard as she issued commands to the footmen. Even from a distance, I could sense her power, her certainty, her absolute conviction that the world should arrange itself according to her will. "That is Lady Marguerite," Clara whispered beside me. "She comes every winter when the social season is over, to torment the Duke and try to marry him off. She has been at it for 3 years now, ever since the Duchess died." "Does she succeed?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The Duke had told me about his sister, about her relentless matchmaking, about the parade of eligible young ladies she brought to Ashworth Hall each year in the hope that one of them would catch his eye. "Never," Clara said, with a hint of satisfaction. "The Duke refuses them all. He will not even see most of them. Lady Marguerite says he is stubborn and ungrateful, but I think he simply knows his own mind, and his mind is not interested in marriage." I felt a strange twist in my chest at those words. The Duke's mind was not interested in marriage, and yet he had told me he loved me. What did that mean? What could it mean, given the gulf between us? I was still a servant in his household, whatever private moments we had shared. The world would never accept a union between us. And Lady Marguerite, with her aristocratic pride and her obsession with the family name, would certainly do everything in her power to prevent it. The days that followed were tense. Lady Marguerite took command of the household as if she owned it, rearranging the furniture, criticizing the menus, dismissing servants who failed to meet her exacting standards. I did my best to stay out of her way, but it was difficult. She seemed to be everywhere, her sharp eyes missing nothing, her sharp tongue sparing no one. And then she brought Lady Beatrice. Lady Beatrice Worthington was everything I was not. She was young, beautiful, wealthy, and born to the highest circles of society. Her father was a marquess. Her mother was the daughter of a duke. She had been raised from birth to be the perfect wife for a man of power and influence, and she had the polished manners and graceful bearing to prove it. She arrived 3 days after Lady Marguerite in a carriage even more elaborate than her hostesses, accompanied by a retinue of servants and enough trunks to outfit an army. I watched from the gallery as she swept into the entrance hall, all golden curls and porcelain skin, and a smile that seemed to light up the room. "She is magnificent, is she not?" Lady Marguerite said, appearing beside me so suddenly that I nearly jumped. The perfect bride for James, beautiful, accomplished, well-connected. Everything a duchess should be. I said nothing. I kept my eyes fixed on Lady Beatrice, who was now greeting the Duke with a curtsy so deep and so graceful that it seemed choreographed. "You are the new maid," Lady Marguerite continued, her voice deceptively casual, "the one who works in the library." "Yes, my lady. My brother seems to have taken an interest in you." I felt my blood turn to ice. I felt the walls closing in around me, just as they had on the day the Duke had questioned me. But I kept my face neutral, my voice steady. "I could not say, my lady. I simply perform my duties as I am assigned." Lady Marguerite smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was the smile of a cat who has cornered a mouse and is deciding whether to play with it before the kill. "Do not think I am unaware of what happens in this house," she said. "I have eyes everywhere. And I know that my brother has been spending a great deal of time in the library since you arrived, far more than is appropriate for a man of his station and a servant of yours." "I perform my duties, my lady," I repeated. Nothing more. "See that it stays that way," Lady Marguerite said. "My brother is vulnerable. He has been alone for too long, and loneliness makes men foolish. But he is still the Duke of Ashworth, and he will marry appropriately, whether he wishes to or not. Lady Beatrice is his future, and you, whatever you may have imagined, are not." She swept away without waiting for a response, leaving me alone in the gallery with my heart pounding and my hands trembling. I knew I should heed her warning. I knew I should pull back, distance myself from the Duke, protect us both from the scandal that would engulf us if the truth came out. But the thought of losing him, of returning to the cold emptiness of my life before, was more than I could bear. I was still standing there, lost in thought, when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting Lady Marguerite to have returned with more threats, but instead I found Lady Beatrice. She was even more beautiful up close. Her skin was flawless, her eyes a striking shade of violet blue, her hair shining like spun gold in the light from the windows. But there was something in her expression that gave me pause. A coldness, barely concealed beneath the surface of her smile. A hardness in her eyes that did not match the sweetness of her voice. "You must be the maid everyone is whispering about," she said. "The one who captured the Duke's attention with a coin." I curtsied, as was proper. "My lady." Lady Beatrice circled me slowly, her eyes taking in every detail of my appearance. I felt like a horse being assessed at market, examined for flaws and weaknesses that might affect my value. "I can see why he is intrigued," she said. "You are pretty, in a common sort of way. And there is something in your bearing that suggests you were not always a servant." I said nothing. There was nothing I could say that would not make things worse. Lady Beatrice stopped in front of me, close enough that I could smell her perfume, a cloying floral scent that made my head ache. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was far more menacing than any shout. "The Duke of Ashworth is going to be my husband. I have worked too hard and sacrificed too much to let a serving girl stand in my way. If you value your position in this household, if you value your freedom, you will stay away from him. Do you understand?" "Yes, my lady," I said, though every fiber of my being rebelled against the words. "Good." Lady Beatrice smiled, a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I am glad we understand each other." She walked away, and I was left alone again, my heart heavy with fear and anger and a desperate, aching love that I did not know how to suppress. I knew that Lady Beatrice was dangerous. I knew that she would stop at nothing to achieve her goals, and I knew that if she discovered the truth about my past, she would use it to destroy me without a moment's hesitation. But I also knew that I could not give up the Duke. Not now. Not after everything we had shared. I loved him, and he loved me, and that love was the only thing that made my life bearable. Whatever happened, I would not let them take it away from me. The following weeks were a torment. Lady Beatrice had established herself in the household with the ease of someone who fully expected to be its mistress before long. She presided over dinners, organized entertainments, and made herself indispensable to Lady Marguerite's campaign to see the Duke married. She was charming and gracious in public, all smiles and gentle laughter, playing the role of perfect aristocratic lady with consummate skill. But in private, she was something else entirely. I saw it first with the other servants. Small cruelties, carefully calculated to wound without leaving visible marks, a sharp word here, a deliberate humiliation there. She would spill wine on a maid's uniform and then criticize her for being unkempt. She would give conflicting orders and then punish the servants for failing to follow both. She moved through the household like a poison, spreading misery wherever she went, and yet somehow always managing to appear blameless. I was her favorite target. She seemed to sense that I was different from the other servants, that there was something between me and the Duke that threatened her plans. And so she made it her mission to make my life unbearable. It started with small things, tasks that were impossible to complete, schedules that left me no time to rest, criticism that was never quite harsh enough to warrant complaint, but constant enough to wear away at my spirit. I bore it all in silence, knowing that any protest would only give her ammunition. Any sign of weakness would only encourage her to press harder. But then she went too far. It happened on a night when the household was gathered in the great hall for one of Lady Marguerite's entertainments. There was music and dancing, and the Duke had been persuaded to attend, though he stood at the edge of the room looking as though he wished to be anywhere else. I was serving wine, moving among the guests with my tray, trying to be invisible as I had learned to be in the months since my arrival. Lady Beatrice was dancing with the Duke, her hand resting possessively on his arm, her smile brilliant and triumphant. I tried not to watch them. I tried not to feel the jealousy that burned in my chest like acid. But my eyes kept drifting back to them, drawn by a force I could not control. And then Lady Beatrice saw me looking. She said something to the Duke, something I could not hear over the music, and then she laughed and released his arm. She crossed the room toward me, her violet eyes glittering with malice, her smile sharp as a blade. "You there," she said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Girl, come here." I approached, my heart pounding, my hands gripping the tray so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Lady Beatrice took a glass of wine from my tray, and then, with a gesture that seemed almost accidental, knocked the tray from my hands. Wine and glass went everywhere, splashing across my uniform, shattering on the floor, staining the expensive carpet with deep red pools that looked almost like blood. "Clumsy creature," Lady Beatrice exclaimed, her voice ringing with feigned shock. "Look what you have done. You have ruined Lady Marguerite's carpet." Every eye in the room turned to me. I felt the weight of their stares, the judgment in their gazes, the whispers that began to ripple through the crowd. I felt my face burn with shame and fury. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, to reveal the truth of what had happened. But I knew it would do no good. Who would believe a servant over a lady? Who would take my word against hers? "My lady," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling of my hands. "I apologize for my clumsiness." "Apologize?" Lady Beatrice's voice rose to a shriek. "You think an apology is sufficient? That carpet was worth more than you will earn in a lifetime of service. You should be dismissed immediately. Mrs. Hartley." Mrs. Hartley appeared, her face pale and troubled. She looked at the mess on the floor, at Lady Beatrice's furious expression, at me standing there in my wine-stained uniform, and I saw her reach a conclusion that I knew was wrong, but could not contradict. "Take this girl to my office," Mrs. Hartley said, her voice heavy with resignation. "I will deal with her after the entertainment." "Wait." The voice cut through the murmur of the crowd like a knife. I looked up, and there was the Duke, striding across the room toward us, his face dark with an emotion I could not identify. The guests parted before him like water before a ship's prow, and even Lady Beatrice took an involuntary step backward. "What is happening here?" the Duke demanded. "Your Grace," Lady Beatrice said, recovering her composure with visible effort. "This servant was clumsy and ruined your sister's carpet. I merely suggested that she be dismissed for her carelessness." The Duke looked at the carpet. He looked at the broken glass, the pools of wine, the trajectory of the stains. He looked at Lady Beatrice, whose smile had begun to falter. And then he looked at me. I saw something pass between us in that moment. A silent communication, a shared understanding that needed no words. He knew. He knew exactly what had happened, even though he had not seen it. He knew because he knew me, because he knew Lady Beatrice, because he had spent years surrounded by liars and had learned to recognize the truth when he saw it. "The carpet is of no consequence," he said, his voice cold. "It can be replaced. But I will not have servants punished for accidents that were not their fault." Lady Beatrice's face went white. "Your Grace, I assure you, I saw it with my own eyes." The girl was clumsy and dropped the tray. "Did she?" The Duke turned his gaze on Lady Beatrice, and I saw her flinch beneath its weight. It seemed strange, then, that the wine is splashed outward from where she was standing, rather than pooled at her feet where it would have fallen if she had simply dropped the tray. It seemed strange that the glass shattered in a pattern consistent with being struck rather than simply released. It seemed strange that you happened to be standing directly in front of her at the moment the accident occurred. The silence in the room was absolute. Lady Beatrice stood frozen, her beautiful face twisted with shock and fury, her carefully constructed mask beginning to crack. Lady Marguerite had risen from her chair, her expression a mixture of alarm and outrage. And the guests watched, breathless, sensing that they were witnessing something momentous. "I do not know what game you are playing, Lady Beatrice," the Duke continued, "but I will not have it in my household. You may consider yourself no longer welcome at Ashworth Hall. Your carriage will be ready within the hour." "Your Grace," Lady Marguerite protested, "you cannot be serious. Lady Beatrice is our guest, and you are treating her as if she were a criminal." "She is not our guest," the Duke replied. "She is an intruder who has abused the hospitality of this house and attempted to humiliate an innocent woman for her own amusement. I will not tolerate it." He turned to Mrs. Hartley. "See that Lady Beatrice's belongings are packed and that she is escorted to her carriage. And see that Eleanor is given the rest of the evening off. She has had an ordeal and deserves to rest." Mrs. Hartley nodded, her face showing nothing of the shock she must have felt. "At once, Your Grace." The Duke turned and walked out of the great hall without another word, leaving behind a room full of stunned guests and a Lady Beatrice who had been reduced from triumphant victor to humiliated exile in the space of a single conversation. I followed Mrs. Hartley out of the room, my head spinning, my heart racing. I did not know what would happen next. I did not know what the Duke's defense of me would cost him, what rumors it would spark, what consequences would follow. I knew only that he had chosen me over Lady Beatrice, chosen truth over lies, chosen love over duty. And I knew that whatever happened, I would never forget the look on his face as he stood before the assembled guests and declared that I was worth protecting. The Duke found me in the library later that night, long after the guests had departed and the household had settled into an uneasy silence. I was sitting by the fire, still in my stained uniform, staring into the flames and trying to make sense of everything that had happened. He did not speak at first. He simply sat down beside me, close enough that our shoulders almost touched, and joined me in watching the fire. The silence between us was comfortable, familiar, the silence of two people who did not need words to understand each other. "I am sorry," I said finally. "I did not mean to cause such a scene." "You did nothing wrong," he replied. Lady Beatrice was cruel, and cruelty should have consequences. But your sister will be furious, and Lady Beatrice will tell everyone what happened. The gossip alone— I do not care about gossip, the Duke interrupted. I care about you. I care about protecting the people I love from those who would harm them. And if that makes me a subject of scandal, so be it. I have been scandalous before. I turned to look at him, and I found him already looking at me. In the firelight, his face was softer than I had ever seen it. The hard lines smoothed away, the walls lowered. He reached out and took my hand, and I felt that familiar warmth spread through me. That sense of connection that seemed to grow stronger every time we touched. Eleanor, he said, I want to tell you something. Something I have been thinking about for weeks, but have not had the courage to say. I waited, my heart in my throat. When Charlotte died, I thought I would never feel anything again. I thought that whatever part of me was capable of love had died with her. That I would spend the rest of my life in this house, surrounded by books and silence, never truly alive. I built walls. I pushed everyone away. I convinced myself that I was better off alone, that love was a weakness that would only lead to more pain. He paused, his grip on my hand tightening. But then you came, and you returned my coin. And you looked at me as if you could see through all my walls, all my defenses, all the masks I had worn for so long that I had forgotten they were masks. And slowly, without meaning to, I began to feel again. I began to hope again. I began to believe that perhaps I was not as broken as I thought. James, I whispered, but he shook his head. Let me finish. I know what the world will say if I follow my heart. I know that my sister will never forgive me. I know that society will condemn us both, that we will be outcasts, that our lives will never be easy. But I also know that I cannot live without you. I know that if I let you go, if I let fear and propriety and the opinions of others dictate my choices, I will regret it for the rest of my life. He reached into his pocket and withdrew something small and glittering, a ring, a beautiful, delicate ring, with a single diamond that caught the firelight and blazed like a captured star. This was my grandmother's, he said. She gave it to me before she died and told me to give it to the woman I loved. I have carried it with me for years, never believing I would find someone worthy of it, but now I have. He looked into my eyes, and I saw everything there, all his hopes and fears and dreams laid bare before me. Eleanor Ashford, he said, will you marry me? I stared at him. I stared at the ring. I felt tears streaming down my face, tears of joy and fear and overwhelming love. I thought of all the obstacles that stood between us, all the reasons why this was madness, all the ways it could end in disaster. And then I thought of the alternative, a life without him, a life of loneliness and regret, a life that was hardly worth living at all. Yes, I said, my voice breaking on the word. Yes, James, I will marry you. He slid the ring onto my finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for me. And then he pulled me into his arms and held me, and I felt, for the first time in my life, truly and completely at home. The months that followed were not easy. Lady Marguerite, as predicted, was furious. She threatened, she pleaded, she warned of scandal and ruin. She told the Duke that he was throwing away his legacy, that he was dishonoring his family, that no one in society would ever receive us if we went through with our plans. She told me that I was a fortune hunter, a schemer, a common servant who had seduced her brother with wiles and deception. She told us both that we were fools who would live to regret our choices. But we did not waver. The Duke, my James, had made his decision, and nothing his sister said could change it. He had spent too many years living according to the expectations of others, and he was done. He would marry the woman he loved, and the world could think what it liked. We were married in the spring, in the chapel at Ashworth Hall, with only the household servants as witnesses. Mrs. Hartley stood in for my mother, and the old butler, Mr. Price, gave me away. It was a simple ceremony, nothing like the grand society wedding that Lady Marguerite had always envisioned for her brother. But it was perfect. It was ours. I remember the way James looked at me as I walked down the aisle, the tears in his eyes that he tried so hard to hide. I remember the warmth of his hand as he slipped the wedding ring onto my finger. I remember the sound of his voice as he spoke his vows, strong and steady, and filled with a love so deep it seemed to encompass the entire universe. I remember thinking, as the chaplain pronounced us husband and wife, that I had spent my whole life searching for a place to belong. And now, at last, I had found it. The scandal, when it came, was everything Lady Marguerite had predicted and more. The story spread through society like wildfire. The Duke of Ashworth had married his own maid, the disgraced daughter of a ruined viscount, in a secret ceremony attended by none of his peers. Ladies clutched their pearls. Gentlemen shook their heads. Invitations dried up. Doors that had once been open slammed shut in our faces. But we did not care. We had each other. We had Ashworth Hall, which became our sanctuary, our fortress, our world. We had our books and our fires and our long conversations that stretched into the small hours of the morning. We had our walks through the gardens, our rides across the moors, our quiet moments of tenderness that needed no witnesses. And we had our love, which grew stronger with each passing day, each passing month, each passing year. I am writing this now, 10 years after that day in the Great Hall when I returned a coin to a stranger and changed the course of both our lives. I am sitting in the library, in the chair by the window that has become my favorite spot, looking out at the grounds of Ashworth Hall. The gardens are in bloom, a riot of color against the ancient gray stone. The sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. And beside me, in his own chair, my husband is reading, as he has done every evening for as long as I have known him. We have 2 children now. A son, William, who has his father's gray eyes and his mother's stubborn spirit, and a daughter, Charlotte, named for the woman whose death nearly destroyed the man I love, but who is nothing like her namesake. She is bright and bold and fearless, and she makes her father smile in ways I never thought possible. Lady Marguerite has never forgiven us. She maintains her distance, visiting only when duty demands, and she has never once acknowledged me as her sister. But that is her loss, not mine. I have built a family of my own, a family founded on love and truth and the courage to follow our hearts despite everything the world threw at us. Sometimes, late at night, James still wakes from nightmares. He dreams of Charlotte, of his failure, of the guilt he has carried for so long. And when he wakes, trembling and lost, I hold him and remind him of everything we have built together. I remind him that he is not the man he was. I remind him that love is stronger than fear, that hope is stronger than despair, that we have proven, together, that it is never too late to begin again. He asked me once, in one of those quiet moments, if I ever regretted my choice, if I ever wished I had married someone else, someone who could have given me the easy life of comfort and respectability that my birth had once promised. I told him the truth, as I have always told him the truth, from that first day in the Great Hall when I picked up his coin and returned it to his hand. I told him that I would not trade a single moment of our life together for all the comfort in the world. I told him that he had given me something far more valuable than wealth or position. He had given me himself, fully and completely, with all his flaws and fears and hidden depths. He had given me a love that was not based on convenience or calculation, but on a genuine connection between 2 souls who had found each other against all odds. And I told him that if I had to do it all over again, if I had to return to that cold November morning and face the test of the coin once more, I would make the same choice. I would pick it up. I would return it. I would look into his eyes and see, beneath the ice and the silence, the man who would become my whole world. Because that is what love is, in the end. It is not the grand gestures or the dramatic declarations. It is the small choices, made over and over again, to trust when trust seems foolish, to hope when hope seems lost, to reach out when every instinct tells you to retreat. I was not born to kneel, but I learned in that great hall that there are some things worth kneeling for. And the man who watched me rise, the coin in my hand, the truth in my eyes, he was worth everything. He still is, and he always will be. The fire is burning low now, and the last light of day is fading from the sky. James has set aside his book and is watching me, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I know what he is thinking. He is thinking of that first day, that first test, that first moment when our eyes met and something passed between us that neither of us could name. "What are you writing?" he asks. "Our story," I tell him. "I want to remember everything." He rises from his chair and crosses to where I am sitting. He takes the pen from my hand and sets it aside. He cups my face in his hands, the way he did on that rainy afternoon when he first told me he loved me. And he looks into my eyes with all the tenderness and passion of a man who has loved deeply and lost greatly and found love again. "You do not need to write it down," he says. "We are living it. Every day, every moment. Our story is not finished yet." And then he kisses me, as he kissed me that first time in the library, as he has kissed me 1,000 times since. And I know that he is right. Our story is not finished. It will never be finished, not as long as we have each other, not as long as our love endures. So I set aside my pen, and I let him lead me away from the window, away from the fading light, into the warmth and safety of the life we have built together. A life that began with a coin and a choice. A life that proved, against all odds, that love can conquer anything, even a duke's frozen heart.